With a reluctant signature on inheritance papers and a weekend commitment to clear out her estranged uncle's property, Rachel Morgan unknowingly stepped into a century-old mystery that would unravel everything she thought she knew. For beneath the crumbling gas station's rusted storage tanks lay a civil war general's fortune that powerful interests had spent generations keeping hidden. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the weathered pavement as Rachel Morgan guided her sedan into the gravel lot of Morgan's service station. The faded sign, its red and blue paint peeling away like autumn leaves, creaked gently in the October breeze. This forgotten corner of Riverdale County hadn't seen customers in nearly a decade, the old-fashioned fuel pumps standing like sentinels over a bygone era. Rachel hadn't planned on inheriting a gas station. Her life as a single mother in the city was carefully balanced around her job as a museum curator, her small apartment, and raising her 10-year-old daughter Lily. The call from the attorney 3 days ago had been unexpected. Your Uncle William Morgan has passed away. Despite your complicated relationship, he's left Morgan's service station to you. The complicated relationship was attorney speak for a 15-year estrangement. Rachel's parents had cut ties with her uncle when she was just 12, taking her away from the summers she'd spent helping at the station, learning about engines and listening to Uncle Will's endless stories. The reasons had never been fully explained, just vague references to dangerous business practices and her mother's tight-lipped warning, "Some people can't be trusted." Rach. Now at 32, she was expected to deal with the abandoned property, clear it out, and prepare it for sale. According to the attorney, it was a weekend task that would close the final chapter on a family history she barely understood. The gas station appeared frozen in time as Rachel rounded the final bend in the road, a small cinder block building with a slumped awning covering what had once been the pump area. Behind it stood a larger garage with 2 service bays, their doors secured with heavy padlocks. The property sat at a crossroads that had once been the main route through the county before the interstate was built 5 miles east, redirecting traffic and commerce away from small businesses like this one. Rachel parked her car beside the weathered building and stepped out, the autumn air crisp against her face. She'd left Lily with her best friend for the weekend, promising to be back by Sunday evening. Looking at the dilapidated property now, she wondered if that timeline had been optimistic. The ancient brass key turned reluctantly in the lock, the door creaking open to reveal a small retail space thick with dust. Old merchandise still lined the shelves: motor oil, windshield wipers, road maps so outdated they showed countries that no longer existed. The musty scent of abandonment filled her nostrils, mingled with lingering traces of gasoline and motor oil. Rachel fumbled for a light switch, surprised when the fluorescent fixtures overhead flickered weakly to life. The attorney had mentioned that basic utilities had been maintained, but she'd been skeptical. Behind a curved counter, an old cash register sat like a museum piece. A door behind the counter presumably led to a back office. "One weekend isn't going to cut it," she muttered, running a finger through the dust on the counter. The rational choice would be to call the attorney immediately, explain this was far more than she'd agreed to handle, hire someone to clear the place out, and never look back. Yet something held her there. Perhaps curiosity about the uncle she barely remembered, or the nagging questions about why her family had severed ties so completely. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. As daylight faded, Rachel explored the back office, a small room with filing cabinets, a desk covered with papers, and a threadbare couch that looked like it had served as a bed more than once. The walls were lined with photographs of the station through the decades. From its grand opening in 1952, when her grandfather had returned from Korea, and built it from scratch, through its heyday in the 60s and 70s to more recent years when Uncle Will stood alone beside the pumps, his smile growing more forced in each successive image. She found clean enough blankets in a supply closet and made up the couch, avoiding the thought of driving back to town for a motel room. After a simple dinner from the supplies she'd brought, Rachel returned to the desk, drawn to the stacks of papers that might hold some clue about her uncle's life or the family rift. Most documents were mundane fuel invoices, equipment receipts, tax forms, but as she sorted through them, Rachel found a leather-bound journal wedged beneath a stack of automotive catalogs. The book was worn, its pages yellowed with age. Opening it, she recognized her uncle's handwriting, the same slanted script from the birthday cards he'd sent before the estrangement. The journal entries dated back 30 years, chronicling the station's operations, but occasionally veering into personal territory. Rachel flipped forward, looking for entries around the time her family had left. There was a gap several months, with no entries and then a single page with just one line. "They're watching the station. They know I haven't sold it." Sold it? To whom? She flipped through more pages, finding increasingly paranoid entries about them watching the property, monitoring deliveries, tapping the phone. It painted a picture of a man descending into delusion, perhaps explaining why her parents had distanced themselves. As she closed the journal, her elbow knocked a small framed photograph from the desk. Bending to retrieve it, Rachel noticed something odd about the floorboards where the frame had landed. One board seemed slightly different from the others, the grain pattern inconsistent, the edges more precisely cut. Heart suddenly racing, Rachel pressed her fingers against it and felt a slight give. She applied more pressure to one end of the board, and it pivoted upward, revealing a small hollow space beneath the floor. Inside was a brass key unlike any modern one she'd seen, large, with an intricate pattern on its bow and a complex bit at the end, the kind that opened something old and significant. Rachel held it up to the light. There was no indication of what it might unlock, but its careful concealment suggested importance. She ran her thumb over the ornate engravings, a series of symbols that looked vaguely familiar to her trained curator's eye, but nothing she could immediately identify. Outside, the wind had picked up, rattling the old sign and whistling through gaps in the window frames. In a flash of lightning from the approaching storm, Rachel thought she saw movement. At the window, a silhouette that disappeared as quickly as it had appeared. Just the tree branches, she told herself, though the nearest tree was a good 30 feet from the building. She returned her attention to the key, wondering what lock it might fit. The gas station had standard door locks, nothing that would require such an elaborate key. Perhaps something in the garage bays she hadn't explored yet, or some old storage container she hadn't discovered. Rachel slipped the key into her pocket and continued searching the office. In a drawer beneath stacks of old correspondence, she found a small leather-bound book, different from the journal, more like a ledger. Inside were columns of numbers and initials, dates stretching back decades. Some entries were circled in red, others crossed out entirely. At the back of the ledger was a hand-drawn map of the station property with several areas marked with the same symbols that appeared on the key. One location was circled repeatedly, a spot behind the garage, labeled only with the letters GL. Beside it, her uncle had written, "The General's legacy stays buried, but never forgotten." A chill ran down Rachel's spine that had nothing to do with the drafty old building. Whatever her uncle had been involved in, it wasn't the ramblings of a paranoid old man. The meticulous records, the hidden key, the coded map, these were the actions of someone deliberately concealing something of great importance. "What were you hiding, Uncle Will?" she whispered to the empty room. The answer would come soon enough, in the form of a hidden entrance, a buried chamber, and a truth that would not only explain her family's sudden departure 15 years ago, but would put Rachel directly in the crosshairs of people who thought the secret had died with William Morgan. Morning arrived with pale sunlight filtering through dust-streaked windows. Rachel had slept fitfully, her dreams filled with shadowy figures and endless corridors leading nowhere. The key she'd discovered lay on the desk beside her, its brass surface catching the light. After a quick breakfast of granola bars and bottled water, Rachel studied the hand-drawn map from her uncle's ledger again. The circled location behind the garage labeled GL seemed the most logical place to start. Perhaps whatever this key unlocked was hidden there. The storm had passed, leaving behind a crisp autumn day and puddles reflecting the clear blue. Rachel made her way across the property toward the weathered garage, its white paint faded to a dull gray. Like the main building, it seemed frozen in time, a relic of a bygone era when service stations actually provided service rather than just fuel and convenience store snacks. Rachel pulled out the ring of keys the attorney had given her, trying several before finding one that fit the padlock on the garage door. It surrendered with a reluctant click, and the door rolled upward with a groan of rusted metal. Inside, shafts of sunlight cut through gaps in the roof, illuminating dancing dust motes. Auto repair equipment sat abandoned, a hydraulic lift, various tools whose purposes Rachel couldn't identify, parts and supplies hanging from pegs on the wall. Everything was covered in a thick layer of dust and cobwebs. She consulted the map again, orienting herself according to the markings. GL should be located at the rear of the garage, near the northwest corner. Rachel picked her way carefully through the cluttered space, mindful of rusted tools and debris. The back wall of the garage was lined with storage cabinets, most empty save for old parts and forgotten supplies. The northwest corner, however, contained something different, a large metal floor plate, the kind that covered access to underground storage tanks. According to the map, this was the spot. Rachel examined the plate carefully. It was about 3 feet square, constructed of solid metal with a recessed handle. When she tried to lift it, however, it wouldn't budge. Looking more closely, she noticed a keyhole, old-fashioned and ornate, positioned near one edge of the plate. "What am I missing?" she muttered, checking the map again. She ran her hands along the edges of the plate, feeling for anything unusual. The keyhole was her only clue. Heart quickening, Rachel took out the brass key she'd found beneath the floorboard. It fit perfectly into the keyhole. With a deep breath, she turned it, feeling the internal mechanism shift with a satisfying click. The plate now lifted easily, revealing a dark opening beneath. Retrieving her phone, Rachel switched on its flashlight and shined it into the opening. The beam revealed not the expected fuel storage tank, but a narrow passage with metal rungs embedded in the concrete wall, a service ladder leading underground. Stone steps continued beyond where the ladder ended, disappearing into shadow. Common sense told her to retreat, to call someone, the attorney, local authorities, anyone before venturing into an unknown underground space on a dilapidated property. But curiosity pulled stronger. This hidden passage might hold answers about her uncle, about the family rift that had shaped her life. Taking a deep breath, Rachel began descending the ladder, testing each rung carefully before putting her full weight on it. The air grew cooler and damper as she went, carrying the earthy scent of soil and something else, paper and leather, like an old library. At the bottom of the ladder, the passage opened into a small underground room with a packed earth floor and walls of fitted stone. It wasn't a storage tank as she'd first thought. This space had been purposefully constructed and carefully maintained. Battery-powered lanterns hung from hooks on the wall, and when Rachel tried one, it surprisingly flickered to life, casting the room in a warm glow. What she saw made her breath catch. The room was an archive. Metal shelving units lined the walls, filled with document boxes, leather-bound volumes, and stacks of yellowed papers. A sturdy wooden table stood in the center, its surface clean and organized with a magnifying glass. white cotton gloves, and archival tools. In one corner stood an old filing cabinet with a strange lock, ornate and old-fashioned. "The key," Rachel whispered, reaching into her pocket. The brass key fit perfectly into the cabinet's lock. It turned with a satisfying click, and the top drawer slid open smoothly, as if recently oiled and maintained. Inside were folders organized by date, stretching back nearly 150 years. Selecting one at random, Rachel carefully opened it to find newspaper clippings, handwritten notes, and photographs, all related to General Thaddeus Lockwood, a Civil War commander she vaguely recognized from her history studies. The name struck a chord in Rachel's memory. General Lockwood had been a controversial figure, brilliant but reclusive, rumored to have amassed a fortune through both military conquest and shrewd investments during Reconstruction. His mansion had once stood on this very crossroads, long before the gas station was built. As she examined more folders, a disturbing pattern emerged. The documents detailed meticulous research into the Lockwood fortune, gold, jewelry, and bearer bonds that had mysteriously disappeared after the general's death in 1879. According to newspaper clippings, his heirs had searched desperately but found nothing, eventually losing the property to taxes. One folder labeled Acquisition Records contained something more revealing, documentation showing how Rachel's grandfather had purchased this specific property in 1952, despite offers for more promising locations. There were surveyor's maps, ground-penetrating radar results, and what appeared to be coded correspondence with historians and archaeologists. Her grandfather hadn't randomly chosen this spot for a gas station. He had deliberately built it here directly atop the rumored location of General Lockwood's lost fortune. "This is what got you in trouble, isn't it?" Rachel murmured, imagining her uncle compiling this damning evidence over decades. The bottom drawer of the filing cabinet contained the most astonishing materials of all, a thick folder labeled Inventory. Inside were detailed lists of gold coins, jewelry, rare weapons, and historical documents, along with approximate values that, even by decades-old estimates, totaled millions. The final page of the folder hit Rachel like a physical blow. Construction of underground chamber completed 1953. All items cataloged and secured. Family trust established. Never sell the property. Her hands trembling, Rachel set down the documents and took a shaky breath. Her grandfather hadn't built a gas station, he'd built a vault, a clever hiding place for a historic treasure he'd somehow discovered. The business had been merely a cover, a reason to own the property and explain the underground storage tanks. A sudden noise from above made her freeze, the unmistakable sound of tires on gravel. Footsteps moved across the ground outside, deliberate and searching. Someone else was at the station, and from the purposeful movement, they weren't just exploring. Rachel quickly switched off the lantern, plunging the hidden room into darkness save for the faint glow of her phone. She gathered the most revealing documents, shoving them into her jacket pockets, and listened intently to the movements above. The footsteps paused directly over the hidden entrance. Rachel's heart pounded so loudly she was certain it would give her away. Had someone followed her? Had she been watched since her arrival? "I know you're down there, Miss Morgan," called a man's voice, smooth and controlled. "I think it's time we discuss your uncle's unfortunate hobby of collecting historical artifacts." Lockwood. It had to be a descendant of the general. But how had they known about the hidden room? How had they known she was here? The answer hit her with chilling clarity. They'd been watching the property, probably for years, waiting for someone to discover William Morgan's archive of evidence. "The Lockwood collection is quite safe with us," the voice continued, "and we're prepared to be exceptionally generous in ensuring it remains private. Your uncle refused such an arrangement, which made things unnecessarily complicated for everyone." Rachel's mind raced through options. There appeared to be no other exit from the underground room. The man above knew she was here. If he was a Lockwood, he had resources, influence, and based on what she'd just learned, a willingness to eliminate problems permanently. But she had something her uncle hadn't. Rachel suddenly noticed the modern equipment tucked discreetly in one corner of the room: a scanner, a laptop, external hard drives. Her uncle may have collected physical evidence, but he'd also created digital backups. The aging station owner had embraced technology as insurance. On the table was a small card with a password and a cloud storage address. Whatever was in these files wasn't just buried in this hidden room. It was already uploaded and secured elsewhere. With this knowledge came courage. Rachel reached for a second drawer in the filing cabinet, one she hadn't yet explored, and found exactly what she needed to ensure her own safety leverage. "Mr. Lockwood," she called out, her voice steadier than she felt, "I think you should know that everything my uncle documented is already backed up. If anything happens to me, it all goes public immediately." The silence that followed was profound. Then the voice, noticeably less composed, "Come upstairs so we can discuss this civilly." "Like you discussed things with my uncle? With my grandfather?" Rachel countered, buying time as she searched for anything else useful in the hidden archive. Her hand closed around something cold and metallic beneath a stack of papers. Her uncle's old service revolver. Ancient history that no one would believe without proof. "I have proof," Rachel said, moving toward the ladder with the revolver concealed in her jacket pocket. "More than my uncle ever showed you." She was bluffing, partially, but something in the silence that followed told her the bluff was working. Whoever was up there, Lockwood or someone working for the family, was recalculating their approach. Rachel Morgan had come to Morgan's service station to clear out an old property and close a chapter of family history. Instead, she had stumbled into a century-old mystery of hidden treasure and deadly secrets, one that had claimed her uncle's life and forced her family to flee. And now, as she prepared to confront the man above, she realized that her inheritance wasn't just a rundown gas station, it was her uncle's legacy. A meticulously documented case against one of the most powerful families in the state, and the responsibility to finally bring them to justice. "I'm coming up," she called, gripping the revolver tightly, "and I think you'll want to hear my terms." The hidden room had changed everything. The question now was whether Rachel would live long enough to use what she'd found. Rachel ascended the metal rungs slowly, the revolver a reassuring weight in her pocket. The documents she'd hastily gathered crinkled against her chest, tucked securely inside her jacket. Each step brought her closer to a confrontation she never could have anticipated when she'd arrived at Morgan's service station just hours earlier. As she neared the top of the ladder, Rachel paused, taking a steadying breath. She wasn't a confrontational person by nature. Her work as a museum curator involved quiet rooms and careful preservation, not standoffs with powerful enemies. Yet, something in her had shifted upon discovering the truth about her family's past, a sense of purpose, of righteous anger. "I'm waiting, Miss Morgan," called the voice from above, impatience evident. With a final deep breath, Rachel pushed through the opening and emerged into the garage. Sunlight streamed through the gaps in the weathered roof, momentarily blinding her after the darkness below. As her vision adjusted, she saw a man standing several yards away. He wasn't what she'd expected. Rather than some imposing figure, he was of average height and build, perhaps in his early 50s, dressed in an expensive but casual outfit that seemed at odds with the dilapidated garage. His silver hair was perfectly styled, his clean-shaven face tanned and lined from outdoor activities rather than labor. He stood with the easy confidence of someone accustomed to authority. "Harrison Lockwood," he said with a slight nod, confirming her suspicions. "I would say it's a pleasure to meet William Morgan's niece, but under the circumstances." "You've been watching the station," Rachel stated, maintaining distance between them. "Waiting for someone to find my uncle's records." Lockwood's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Your uncle was a troublemaker with a penchant for conspiracy theories." We've kept an eye on this property out of concern that his delusions might cause problems for innocent parties. Innocent? Rachel couldn't keep the incredulity from her voice. I've seen the evidence. The Lockwood fortune, how my grandfather found it, how you've been trying to reclaim it for decades. Something darkened in Lockwood's expression. Tragic accidents and unfortunate misunderstandings happen in small towns. Ms. Morgan, trying to connect unrelated events into some grand conspiracy is what unstable minds do. Is that why my parents took me away? Because my uncle was unstable? Lockwood spread his hands in a gesture of false sympathy. Your parents recognized that William was becoming dangerous with his obsessions. They made the right choice to protect you. The casual dismissal ignited something in Rachel. They were protecting me from you. They knew what you'd done to my grandfather, but they couldn't prove it, so they ran. A colorful interpretation, Lockwood replied coolly, but we're not here to debate ancient history. I'm here to make you an offer. Like the offer you made my uncle? Rachel's hand moved closer to her pocket. The one he refused before he was conveniently found dead of a heart attack at 62. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Lockwood's face. You have no idea what we're talking about. I know more than you think, Rachel bluffed, drawing confidence from his reaction. The archive isn't just paper records. Everything's then digitized, backed up to multiple secure locations. If anything happens to me, it all goes public. Lockwood studied her for a long moment, reassessing. What do you want? Money? The station is worthless. The underground tank's leaking. The building condemned. But I could offer you a fair price. More than fair. I want justice, Rachel said. For my uncle, for my grandfather, for all the ways your family has manipulated and threatened mine for 3 generations. A cold laugh escaped Lockwood. Justice? After 70 years, with evidence. Collected by a man everyone in town considered mentally unstable? He shook his head. Be realistic, Ms. Morgan. Even if you could convince anyone to look into these ancient allegations, the Lockwood family has relationships with every judge and official in 3 counties. The State Historical Society might be interested. Rachel countered. Especially with documentation showing how a Civil War general's fortune was discovered and hidden again. The historical artifacts alone would justify a complete investigation. This information clearly caught Lockwood off guard. His carefully maintained composure slipped, revealing a flash of genuine concern. The property values alone, Rachel continued, gaining confidence. Imagine what would happen if every landowner in Riverdale County learned that historical treasures might be buried beneath their feet. The lawsuits would be endless. Lockwood's expression hardened. You're making a very serious mistake, Ms. Morgan. Your uncle made the same one. It didn't end well for him. The threat hung in the air between them. Rachel's hand closed around the revolver in her pocket, though she had no real intention of using it. She wasn't a killer, unlike the man standing before her. Here's what's going to happen, Rachel said, surprised at the steadiness in her voice. I'm going to leave this station with copies of everything my uncle documented. You're not going to follow me or interfere in any way. And then what? Lockwood asked, his tone mocking. You'll single-handedly take down a family that's been the backbone of this county for generations, based on the ramblings of a bitter old man? No, came a new voice from the garage entrance. She won't be doing it alone. Both Rachel and Lockwood turned toward the unexpected interruption. A man in his early 30s stood framed in the doorway, a press badge hanging from his neck, a camera in his hands. Behind him was an older woman Rachel didn't recognize. David Carter, Riverdale Chronicle, the man introduced himself, stepping inside. I've been investigating the Lockwood family's business practices for 2 years now. Your uncle reached out to me before his death, Ms. Morgan. This is private property, Lockwood snapped. You're trespassing. Actually, the older woman sighed, Ms. Morgan owns this property now. We're here at her invitation. She turned to Rachel. "Margaret Holloway. I was your uncle's attorney before the Lockwoods pressured my firm to drop him as a client. I've been waiting a long time for those records to see the light of day." Rachel stared at the unexpected allies in confusion. "My uncle's attorney? But the lawyer who contacted me was Samuel Brenner." "Yes," Margaret finished for her. "The Lockwood family made sure one of their associates handled William's affairs after his death. But your uncle was smarter than they gave him credit for. He made arrangements for David to continue his work and for me to contact you if you ever came looking for answers." Lockwood's face had gone rigid with anger. "This is absurd. You have nothing but the paranoid delusions of a senile old man." "Actually," David said, holding up his camera, "I have quite a bit more than that, including this entire conversation, Mr. Lockwood. Would you like to clarify your comments about taking care of Miss Morgan's uncle? Or perhaps your references to judges and officials being in your family's pocket?" The color drained from Lockwood's face. For the first time, he seemed genuinely rattled. "You're manipulating my words. This is entrapment." "It's journalism," David replied, "and it's just the beginning. Thanks to William Morgan's meticulous record-keeping, we now have enough evidence to justify a full investigation by authorities beyond your sphere of influence." Margaret approached Rachel, her expression gentle but urgent. "We should continue this discussion elsewhere. Mr. Lockwood rarely travels without his security detail. They'll be wondering why he's taking so long." As if on cue, the sound of an approaching vehicle reached them, tires on gravel, the distinctive purr of an expensive engine. "My son," Lockwood explained with a thin smile. "He'll be interested to meet William Morgan's niece. He handles our more delicate family matters these days." Rachel sensed the escalating danger. "We need to leave now." "The hidden room," David said quickly. "Is there another exit?" "I don't know," Rachel admitted. "I only found it today." "There is," Margaret confirmed. "Your uncle showed me once, years ago. It leads to a drainage culvert behind the property. We can circle around to our car." Lockwood moved to block their path to the floor plate entrance. "I'm afraid I can't let you leave with those records. Family reputation and all that." Rachel's hand tightened on the revolver, though she still hoped to avoid using it. David, seeing her tension, stepped forward. "Mr. Lockwood, I've already transmitted preliminary information to colleagues at 3 different news outlets and the State Attorney General's office," he said calmly. "Preventing us from leaving will only accelerate the investigation. Your best option now is damage control." The car outside had stopped. Doors slammed, followed by footsteps approaching the garage. Lockwood appeared to make a rapid calculation. With a tight smile, he stepped aside. "We'll be speaking again very soon, Ms. Morgan. Family matters tend to require personal attention." "Documents show it was never just about the fortune," Rachel said quietly. "Your family has been manipulating local politics, real estate, even law enforcement for generations, all to protect your secret." Something almost like regret flickered across Lockwood's features. "The past is complicated, Ms. Morgan. There were considerations you couldn't understand." "Harrison?" A younger voice called from outside. "Is everything all right?" "Perfectly fine, James," Lockwood responded, his eyes never leaving Rachel's. "Just having a chat with William Morgan's niece about her inheritance." Margaret tugged urgently at Rachel's arm. "Now, while we have the chance." The 3 of them moved quickly to the floor plate. Rachel slipped through first, followed by David, with Margaret bringing up the rear just as a younger man, presumably James Lockwood, entered the garage. "What's going on?" they heard him demand as Margaret pulled the hidden door closed behind them. In the darkness of the underground room, Margaret led them to the far corner, where a narrow passage Rachel hadn't noticed earlier stretched into darkness. "This way," the older woman whispered, "and hurry. They know about this place now. It won't be safe for long." As they navigated the claustrophobic tunnel, David explained in hushed tones how William Morgan had contacted him 2 years earlier, sharing some of his evidence against the Lockwoods. The investigation had been proceeding slowly, hampered by the family's influence until William's sudden death. "Your uncle wasn't senile," David assured Rachel. "The Lockwoods arranged for his heart attack after he threatened to go public. By the time I realized what had happened, the coroner had already signed off on natural causes. He knew they might come after him," Margaret added. "That's why he created the digital backups, why he reinforced this tunnel. He was preparing for a confrontation that finally came." The tunnel eventually opened into a large drainage culvert behind the property, just as Margaret had promised. They emerged cautiously, checking for signs of James Lockwood or anyone else watching the station. "My car's down the road," Margaret said. "We parked away from the service station in case the Lockwoods were monitoring it." As they hurried across an overgrown field behind the station, Rachel looked back at Morgan's service station, the place that had featured in her childhood memories, that had claimed her uncle's life, that had driven her grandfather to years of secretive preservation, and that had finally brought everything full circle with her return. "What happens now?" she asked as they reached Margaret's car, hidden behind a stand of trees. David carefully stored his camera in a secure case. "Now we take your uncle's evidence to people who can use it: state-level historical preservation agencies, federal prosecutors, news outlets beyond the Lockwoods' influence. It won't be easy," he cautioned. "The Lockwoods won't go down without a fight. They have resources, connections, and they've already shown they're willing to go to extreme lengths to protect themselves." Rachel clutched the documents she'd taken from the archive, thinking of her uncle, of her parents fleeing in the night, of her grandfather spending decades building a hidden vault beneath his modest business. "They've gotten away with it for 70 years, she said, determination hardening her voice. "That ends now." As Margaret's car pulled away from Morgan's service station, Rachel Morgan understood that the inheritance that had seemed like a burden just 24 hours ago was actually a sacred trust. Her uncle had left her more than a rundown gas station. He had left her the truth, and with it the responsibility to finally bring justice to those who had thought themselves above it. Behind them, Harrison Lockwood watched the departing car. From the garage doorway, his son James beside him. "They have everything, don't they?" James asked, tension evident in his voice. Alexander's expression remained impassive. "They have what William Morgan collected. But they don't know the full story. Not yet. What do we do?" The elder Lockwood turned to his son, his face hardening. "What this family has always done, whatever is necessary to protect what's ours." The confrontation at Morgan's service station was over. The true battle was just beginning. Margaret drove with the steady confidence of someone who knew every back road in the county. They avoided the main highways, taking winding rural routes that meandered through farmland and forest. No one spoke for the first 20 minutes, the tension of their narrow escape still hanging in the air. Finally, David broke the silence. "We should be safe for now. I doubt even the Lockwoods would attempt anything in broad daylight." "Don't underestimate them," Margaret replied, checking the rearview mirror for the third time in as many minutes. "I've watched that family operate for 40 years. They didn't build their empire by playing fair." Rachel sat in the back seat, her mind racing to process everything that had happened. Just yesterday, she had been a museum curator with a normal life, reluctantly dealing with an unwanted inheritance. Now she was fleeing from one of the most powerful families in the region, carrying evidence of historical theft, corporate crimes, and possibly murder. "Where are we going?" she asked suddenly, realizing she had no idea where Margaret was taking them. "My cabin," the older woman answered. About an hour from here, just over the county line. Harrison's influence doesn't extend quite as far there. We'll be safe enough to regroup and plan our next steps." Rachel looked down at the documents, clutched in her hands. "I still don't understand how my uncle connected with you both. The way my parents talked about him, they made it sound like he was becoming paranoid, isolated. That's what the Lockwoods wanted everyone to believe." David turned in his seat. "To face her. Your uncle's reputation was systematically undermined over years' subtle rumors, convenient incidents, financial pressure. By the time he approached me with his evidence, most of the town already thought he was just a bitter old man with conspiracy theories. But he found you," Rachel said. "A journalist willing to listen." David nodded. "I was new to the Chronicle, looking to make my mark with something bigger than church picnics and county fairs. William approached me carefully, shared just enough to pique my interest without revealing his full hand. It took months before he trusted me with access to his complete investigation." "And you?" Rachel asked Margaret. "How did you get involved?" The older woman's hands tightened slightly on the steering wheel. "I handled your grandparents' legal affairs for years. I was there when your grandfather got sick, when the medical bills started piling up. William came to me when he first suspected the connection between Howard's illness and the Lockwoods, increased interest in the property." Margaret paused, glancing at Rachel in the rearview mirror. "I helped him file public records requests. Obtain historical preservation permits, all perfectly legitimate. But when Harrison Lockwood realized what William was doing, the pressure started. Most subtle at first, clients mysteriously taking their business elsewhere. Then not so subtle, my senior partners called me in and told me the firm would no longer represent William Morgan." "But you kept helping him anyway," Rachel guessed, "unofficially. By then, I'd seen enough evidence to believe him, and Howard—" Margaret's voice softened. "Your grandfather was a dear friend. What happened to him wasn't right." They drove in silence for several more minutes, each lost in their own thoughts. The landscape gradually changed from flat farmland to more rugged wooded terrain. Margaret turned onto an unmarked gravel road that wound upward into the hills. "There's something I still don't understand," Rachel said finally. "If my uncle had all this evidence, why didn't he go public with it years ago? Why hide everything in a secret?" "Room?" David exchanged a glance with Margaret. "He tried, initially. Approached the local paper, not me. This was before my time. Editor refused to run the story. Then he tried the County Historical Society. Suddenly all his appointments were canceled. The Lockwoods blocked him at every turn," Margaret added. "And then they started playing hardball. Your parents' house was broken into, nothing taken, just left in disarray. A message: your father's business lost its major contracts overnight. The bank suddenly called in loans on equipment. The pieces fell into place in Rachel's mind. So my parents didn't leave because they thought Uncle Will was crazy. They left because the Lockwoods were threatening us." "Your parents wanted to take William with them," Margaret said gently. "But he refused to leave. Said someone had to stay and gather evidence, build a case no one could ignore or suppress. He believed if he left, the Lockwoods would win permanently." The gravel road ended at a modest cabin nestled among tall pines, simple but well-maintained, with a covered porch and a small detached garage. Margaret parked and led them inside, checking carefully before unlocking the door. The interior was cozy, a main room with a stone fireplace, small kitchen area, and doors leading to what Rachel presumed were bedrooms. One wall was covered with bookshelves. Another featured topographical maps of the county. "We should be safe here for now," Margaret said, securing the door behind them. "No one associates this place with me. It's owned through a family trust, under my maiden name. David immediately set up his laptop on the dining table. We need to catalog what we have and get it secured online. How much did you manage to grab from the archive? He asked Rachel. She carefully removed the documents from inside her jacket. Not everything, but the most damning materials, the records about the Lockwood fortune, the evidence about my grandfather's discovery, the documentation of my uncle's investigation and its connection to his death. Good, David nodded. Between what you have there and the backup files your uncle already uploaded, we should have enough to start building our case. Case for what exactly? Rachel asked. What's our actual plan here? Margaret and David exchanged another look. That depends partly on you, Margaret said carefully. How involved you want to be. This isn't your fight, Rachel. Your uncle spent decades on this crusade. It cost him his life, his reputation. No one would blame you for handing over the evidence and walking away. The suggestion was tempting. Rachel could picture it, giving everything to David and Margaret, returning to her orderly life in the city, to Lily, leaving the Lockwoods and their crimes in more experienced hands. It would be the sensible choice. But then she thought of her uncle dying alone, his reputation in tatters, of her grandfather, who had discovered a fortune only to spend his life protecting it from those who would kill for it, of her parents, driven from their home by threats and intimidation. It became my fight the moment I found that key, Rachel said firmly. Tell me what we need to do. Relief showed on both their faces. First, we build a bulletproof case, David said, typing rapidly on his laptop. The Lockwoods will have expensive lawyers who will try to discredit everything. We need irrefutable evidence, witnesses willing to come forward, experts to authenticate the historical artifacts. Witnesses? Rachel questioned. After 70 years, and with the Lockwoods' influence in the county? There are people who've remained silent out of fear, not loyalty, Margaret explained. Former employees who saw suspicious activities. Local officials who were pressured to look the other way. Bank employees who processed questionable transactions. Getting them to speak won't be easy, David acknowledged. But seeing someone finally standing up to the Lockwoods might embolden others. Rachel considered this. And the treasure itself? We can't exactly dig it up ourselves. Your uncle arranged for periodic documentation through a historical preservation expert, Margaret said. Paid in cash, used different names. The most recent assessment was just 8 months ago, confirming the artifacts remain intact and preserved in the underground vault. David looked up from his computer. Here's what we're dealing with. The evidence you recovered gives us a strong foundation, but the Lockwoods will claim it's all fabricated by a man with a grudge. We need corroboration from multiple sources, and we need protection. Protection? From whom? Rachel asked. The local police won't help if the Lockwoods own them. I have contacts at the state level, David said. People outside the Lockwood sphere of influence. But they'll need something solid before they'll act. Political. Figures don't stick their necks out based on historical allegations alone. So we're back to needing current evidence, Rachel mused. She thought for a moment, her curator's mind analyzing the problem methodically. What about the historical value of the collection itself? If we can prove the existence of General Lockwood's lost fortune, the State Historical Society would have to act, wouldn't they? David's expression brightened. That's actually brilliant. If we can document that the collection contains items of significant historical importance, Civil War artifacts, documents of national interest, we could force involvement from state and even federal authorities. The Lockwoods couldn't block that. We would need an expert assessment, Margaret added, nodding appreciatively. Someone with credentials the Lockwoods couldn't easily discredit. Rachel felt a spark of hope. I'm a museum curator specializing in 19th century American artifacts. I could provide that assessment myself with proper documentation. It could work, David agreed, typing notes. But we'd need to move quickly, before the Lockwoods realize what we're doing. Margaret looked troubled. Harrison Lockwood has already seen us together. He knows we have some of William's evidence. We might have less time than we think. As if in answer to her concern, David's phone buzzed with an incoming message. His expression darkened as he read it. "What is it?" Rachel asked. "My contact at the Chronicle. Lockwood representatives just showed up at the newspaper office with a cease and desist letter, threatening a defamation lawsuit if any unsubstantiated allegations about the family are published." He looked up grimly. "They're moving faster than I expected." "And that's just the official response," Margaret said. "I guarantee they're taking other actions we can't see yet." Rachel felt a new determination hardening within her. "Then we need to move faster too. My uncle spent years gathering evidence while the Lockwoods blocked him at every turn. We don't have that luxury." "What are you suggesting?" David asked. "A different approach," Rachel said, thinking quickly. "Instead of trying to build a perfect case before going public, what if we use strategic exposure to force the issue? Release enough evidence to attract attention from authorities outside Lockwood influence, while holding back our strongest proof to counter their inevitable denials." David considered this. "Risky. We'd be showing our hand early, but we'd be controlling the narrative," Rachel argued. "Right now, they're assuming we'll follow the same playbook my uncle did: careful evidence gathering, official channels, systems they know how to manipulate. They won't expect us to go straight to the public." "It could work," Margaret said slowly, "especially if we focus on the historical significance of the collection. That creates immediate pressure for official action to preserve artifacts of national importance." David nodded, warming to the idea. "I have contacts at regional news outlets, historical society, isolated property, awaiting instructions." The battle for truth had begun, but so had the Lockwoods' counterattack. The next 48 hours would determine whether justice would finally come to Riverdale County, or whether powerful interests would once again bury the truth beneath layers of influence and intimidation. Day broke over Margaret's cabin with a pristine calm that belied the tension within. Rachel had slept fitfully, her conversation with her parents replaying in her mind. Their initial shock had given way to fear, the same fear that had driven them away 15 years ago, followed by reluctant acknowledgement that this fight might finally have a chance with new allies and modern technology. "We should have told you the truth," her mother had said, voice cracking, "but we were trying to protect you. The Lockwoods had made it clear what would happen if we supported your uncle's accusations." "Be careful, Rach," her father added before hanging up. "These people have been getting away with this for generations. They won't stop now." Morning brought a flurry of activity. David had been up before dawn, coordinating with contacts at regional news outlets. Margaret worked the phone, speaking in careful coded language to former colleagues who might be sympathetic to their cause. Rachel focused on organizing her uncle's documents, creating a chronology that showed the pattern of harassment, threats, and suspicious deaths surrounding the Lockwood fortune. "We have interest from 3 historical preservation journalists," David announced, joining Rachel at the dining table where she'd spread out her work. "They want documentation, authentication of the artifacts, and ideally on the record statements from credible sources." "And the Historical Society?" Rachel asked Margaret as the older woman ended her latest call. "2 curators have agreed to review our evidence confidentially," Margaret replied. "But we need proper documentation of the actual artifacts to show their historical significance." Rachel tapped a document in front of her. "According to Uncle Will's records, the most valuable items are in a sealed vault beneath the main underground chamber. Civil War-era documents signed by President Lincoln, General Lockwood's personal effects, and gold coins from the period. Who knows about the exact location of these items?" David asked, leaning over to examine the map Rachel had created. "Only my uncle and grandfather, as far as I know," Rachel explained. The entrances were deliberately obscured, with multiple false leads to throw off anyone who might discover the main chamber. We need to document those artifacts first, Rachel decided. But how do we get access without alerting the Lockwoods? David considered this. I could approach the property as a journalist doing a feature on historic roadside businesses. Nothing specifically mentioning the Lockwoods or the fortune. Too risky, Margaret countered. Harrison has probably already alerted his allies to watch for any unusual activity. A journalist suddenly interested in an abandoned gas station would raise immediate flags. They debated options until Rachel had a realization. Wait, my uncle continued documenting the collection over the years. How did he get access without being noticed? Margaret smiled slightly. William was clever. He scheduled his visits during power outages or severe weather, when the Lockwood surveillance would be compromised. He had a contact at the electric company who would give him advance notice. Do you still have those contacts? Rachel asked hopefully. Better, Margaret replied. There's a scheduled maintenance outage for that grid tomorrow morning routine. Work on the lines. It's already been announced, so it won't raise suspicions. We could use that window. While Margaret made arrangements, David received a message that made him frown deeply. Problem? Rachel asked. My editor at the Chronicle. Just got a visit from the county commissioner, he said quietly, suggesting that continuing to employ me represents a liability to community harmony. The Lockwoods are already applying pressure. The news sent a chill through the room. The Lockwoods were working to isolate them, cutting off potential allies. They're moving faster than we anticipated, Margaret said, returning from her call. But my contact confirms the power outage is still scheduled for 7 a.m. tomorrow. We'll have approximately 2 hours. Rachel couldn't help glancing out the window, scanning the surrounding trees. The sense of being watched hadn't left her since they'd arrived at the cabin. We should prepare tonight, she said. Pack everything we need: cameras, documentation equipment, authentication materials. I'll bring proper archival tools. Margaret added, and I've arranged for a secure digital upload connection. We'll transmit everything we document immediately to multiple secure locations. As they prepared their equipment, Rachel called her daughter's babysitter to check in. Hearing Lily's voice brought both comfort and renewed determination. This wasn't just about historical justice anymore. It was about breaking a cycle of intimidation that had already claimed too many lives and disrupted too many families. How's everything going, sweetie? Rachel asked, trying to keep her voice light. Good. We made cookies and went to the park, Lily chattered happily. When? Are you coming home, Mom? Soon, Rachel promised, though uncertainty gnawed at her. I'm taking care of some important things at Great Uncle Will's place. Remember, I told you about him. The one with the cool gas station where you used to play when you were little? That's right. I found some of his special things, and I need to take care of them. After saying goodnight to Lily, Rachel rejoined the others. The sense of purpose that had been building all day crystallized into something stronger resolve. Tomorrow they would document the evidence that could finally break the Lockwoods' hold on Riverdale County, whatever the risk. Dawn arrived misty and cool, the sun struggling to pierce low-hanging clouds. They set out in Margaret's car before first light, taking a circuitous route to avoid main roads where they might be recognized. Rachel had packed her professional equipment, the same tools she used in her museum work to document and authenticate historical artifacts. The power should go out at exactly 7 a.m., Margaret said, checking her watch as they approached the outskirts of town. That will disable most of the surveillance in the area, including any the Lockwoods have installed. They parked half a mile from the gas station, concealing Margaret's car in a stand of trees, and approached on foot through woods that bordered the property. At precisely 7 a.m., they watched as the few visible lights in the area winked out. Their window had opened. Moving quickly but cautiously, they made their way to the garage. The padlock they'd left the day before had been replaced with a newer, heavier one. David produced a set of bolt cutters from his backpack. "Your uncle taught me a few tricks," he explained as he made short work of the lock. Once inside, they moved directly to the hidden entrance. Rachel unlocked it with the brass key, and they descended into the underground chamber, flashlights illuminating their way. "We need to work systematically," Rachel instructed, setting up portable battery-powered lights. "David, photograph everything exactly as it is. Margaret, help me locate the entrance to the sealed vault." According to her uncle's notes, the main vault was concealed behind a false wall in the northeast corner of the room. Rachel examined the stonework carefully, looking for the trigger mechanism described in the documents. "Here," she said finally, locating a small indentation that appeared to be a natural flaw in the stone. When she pressed it, a section of the wall shifted slightly, revealing a narrow gap. "It's designed to look like settling has created a natural crack," Rachel explained, wedging her fingers into the opening and pulling gently. The false wall swung outward, revealing a small antechamber beyond. What they saw inside made them all pause in awe. The vault was smaller than the main room, but impeccably preserved. Climate-controlled cases lined the walls, each containing carefully cataloged artifacts, Civil War uniforms, weapons, documents, and personal effects, all labeled in her grandfather's precise handwriting. In the center of the room stood a large display case containing what must have been General Lockwood's most prized possessions: his ceremonial sword, brass telescope, field journals, and a collection of gold coins and currency from the era. "This is extraordinary," Rachel breathed, her professional training taking over as she began to assess the collection. "These items aren't just valuable monetarily, they're historically priceless. The preservation work is museum quality." "Your grandfather and uncle were meticulous," Margaret agreed. "They understood exactly what they were protecting." David photographed everything, while Rachel documented each artifact, noting condition, provenance, and historical significance. Some items were particularly noteworthy: letters signed by President Lincoln thanking Lockwood for his service, detailed maps of Confederate positions that had never been published, journals containing Lockwood's personal observations about key Civil War battles. These documents alone would force a state historical society intervention, Rachel explained as she carefully examined a leather portfolio. They contain previously unknown historical information that belongs in national archives, not hidden away as private property. As they worked, Margaret kept 45 minutes left in our window, she warned. Rachel nodded, moving to the central display case. "This is what we need to focus on now, the core of the Lockwood fortune." The case contained not just historical artifacts, but items of substantial monetary value: gold, coins, jewelry, and what appeared to be bearer bonds from the Reconstruction era. A small leather journal laid open beside them contained a handwritten inventory in General Lockwood's script. According to this, he considered these items a trust for the nation, not personal property, Rachel said, carefully photographing the journal pages. He intended them to fund veterans' care and reconstruction efforts after his death. But his family hid them instead, David concluded, claiming they'd been stolen or lost. "And when my grandfather accidentally discovered them while digging the foundation for his gas station," Rachel continued, "he understood their true significance," Margaret finished. "Not just as valuable items, but as historical evidence of misappropriated funds meant for public good." Their documentation complete, Rachel began to pack up her equipment. "We have what we need. This collection isn't just some family treasure, it's historical evidence of fraud and theft that continued across generations." As they prepared to leave, a faint sound from above made them freeze, the crunch of tires on gravel. "The power's back on early," Margaret whispered, checking her watch. "We still had 20 minutes. "No," David said grimly. "Someone's moved." Up the schedule. We need to go now. They quickly gathered their equipment, ensuring all documentation had been transmitted to their secure servers. Rachel carefully closed the vault door, restoring the false wall to its original position. They moved toward the exit tunnel Margaret had shown them the day before, but before they reached it, they heard the unmistakable sound of the garage door rolling open above. "They're here," Rachel whispered. "How did they know?" There was no time to speculate. They slipped into the narrow passage, Margaret leading the way with a small flashlight. The tunnel was barely wide enough for one person, forcing them to move single file, hunched over to avoid the low ceiling. Behind them, they heard voices in the main chamber, multiple people, moving with purpose. "They've been here," a voice. That sounded like James Lockwood called. "Check the vault." The tunnel seemed endless, twisting through the earth beneath the property. After what felt like an eternity, they emerged into a drainage ditch 100 yards from the station, well concealed by overgrown vegetation. "This way," Margaret whispered, leading them through woods parallel to the road. "We need to reach the car without being seen." They moved as quickly as they dared, staying low and using trees for cover. When they finally reached Margaret's car, David scanned the area carefully before they climbed in. "Drive normally," he advised as Margaret started the engine. "No sudden movements that might attract attention. They might not know we've left the station yet." They had made it less than a mile when Rachel, glancing back, spotted a black SUV pull onto the road behind them. "We're being followed," she said quietly. Margaret nodded, maintaining her speed. "I see them. There's a state police checkpoint 10 miles ahead, road construction. If we can reach it." The SUV was gaining ground, its driver clearly not concerned about speed limits on the rural road. "They're not going to let us reach that checkpoint," David said, watching the rearview mirror. "Can we outrun them?" "Not in this car," Margaret admitted, "but I know these roads better than they do." Without warning, she turned onto a narrow side road, barely more than a dirt track cutting through dense woods. The SUV swerved to follow, but its larger size made navigating the tight turns difficult. "There's a bridge ahead," Margaret explained, as she maneuvered around potholes, one lane, weight limited. "Their vehicle's too heavy. They'll have to go around, adding 20 minutes to their route." Sure enough, when they reached the narrow wooden bridge spanning a deep creek, Margaret drove across without hesitation. The SUV stopped at the bridge entrance, unable to follow. As they pulled away, Rachel saw James Lockwood emerge from the vehicle, his face contorted with rage. "That won't hold them long," David cautioned. "They'll radio ahead, try to cut us off." "We don't need long," Margaret replied. "Just enough time to reach someone who can help." She drove with focused intensity, taking a complex route through back roads until they reached a small municipal building in a neighboring county. "The county sheriff," Margaret explained as she parked. "Martha Jennings. She's an old friend, and more importantly, she has no ties to the Lockwoods." Inside, they were quickly ushered into Sheriff Jennings' office, a no-nonsense woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and a reputation for incorruptibility. "Margaret," she greeted them. "Your call sounded urgent. What kind of trouble are you in now?" As they explained the situation, laying out the evidence they'd gathered, the sheriff's expression grew increasingly serious. "The Lockwoods have always operated like they're above the law," she acknowledged. "But they've been careful to keep their activities contained to Riverdale County, where they control the local authorities." "Not anymore," David said, showing her the digital evidence they'd collected. "We have documentation of historically significant artifacts being illegally withheld, possible fraud dating back generations, and evidence suggesting William Morgan's death wasn't natural." Sheriff Jennings studied the materials carefully. "This is beyond my jurisdiction alone, but it's enough to request state involvement. I'll need formal statements from all of you." As they provided their statements, Rachel received a call from a number she didn't recognize. Stepping aside to answer it, she was surprised to hear the voice of one of her museum colleagues. "Rachel, it's Daniel from the State Historical Society. We've received the most extraordinary documentation package from an anonymous source. Civil War artifacts of incredible significance, apparently hidden for generations. They're tagged with your name as the authenticating expert." Margaret had been busy, Rachel realized. She had sent their documentation to contacts in the historical community, creating additional pressure points beyond law enforcement. "Yes," Rachel confirmed. "I've authenticated those items personally. They represent a collection of national, historical importance that's been deliberately concealed. The state director is convening an emergency meeting," Daniel explained. "This could trigger a federal preservation order if even half of what we're seeing is accurate. Where are you? We need you here immediately." When Rachel returned to the others, Sheriff Jennings was on the phone with the state attorney general's office. "It's happening," Rachel told David and Margaret. "The Historical Society is already moving to protect the artifacts. They've called an emergency meeting." David's phone buzzed with incoming messages. "And 3 news outlets have agreed to run the story tomorrow morning. Once it breaks, the Lockwoods won't be able to contain it." For the first time since discovering the hidden room, Rachel felt the tide turning. The Lockwoods had maintained their power through isolation and intimidation, but that strategy couldn't withstand coordinated exposure on multiple fronts. Sheriff Jennings hung up the phone. "The Attorney General is sending investigators. They'll be here within the hour. In the meantime, I'm placing you under protective custody. The Lockwoods won't risk attacking the sheriff's office, but I wouldn't put anything past them at this point." As they waited for the state authorities to arrive, Rachel called her parents, again to update them. This time, her father's voice carried something she hadn't heard in years when discussing the Lockwoods' hope. "Your uncle would be proud, Rachel," he said. "He never gave up believing that someday the truth would come out." "I'm not just doing this for him," Rachel replied. "I'm doing it for all of us. For Lily, for everyone who's been afraid of them. Lockwoods for generations." When she hung up, Rachel found Sheriff Jennings studying a map of the county. "The Lockwoods won't surrender easily," the sheriff cautioned. "They've already mobilized their security personnel. We've received reports of armed men at roadblocks on the main routes back to Riverdale County. They're desperate," Margaret observed. "That's good and bad. Good because it means we've truly threatened them for the first time. Bad because desperate people make dangerous choices." "We need to secure the artifacts," Rachel said suddenly. "Now that we've left the station, what's to stop the Lockwoods from destroying or moving everything before the authorities can intervene?" Sheriff Jennings considered this. "I can request an emergency preservation order, but it will take time to process, even expedited." "We don't have time," David argued. "The Lockwoods could be dismantling the vault as we speak." Rachel thought quickly, her curator's mind racing through options. "What if we don't need an order? The property legally belongs to me. I can grant access to law enforcement to protect historical artifacts on my property." Sheriff Jennings raised an eyebrow. "That could work. I can send deputies immediately as a property protection detail at the owner's request." "Do it," Rachel urged, "and I'm going with them." Both David and Margaret protested immediately, but Rachel stood firm. "I'm the legal owner and the only qualified person who can identify if artifacts have been tampered with or removed," she insisted. "And more importantly, the Lockwoods need to see that I'm not hiding, that I'm not afraid. This ends now, not through more shadows and secrets, but in the open." After intense debate, a plan was formulated. Rachel would accompany a team of Sheriff Jennings deputies to secure Morgan's service station, while David coordinated with the arriving state. Investigators and Margaret continued activating her network of legal and historical contacts. As they prepared to leave, Sheriff Jennings pulled Rachel aside. The Lockwoods have operated with impunity for generations because people were afraid to stand against them openly, she said quietly. What you're doing takes real courage, Rachel. Thought about her uncle, spending decades meticulously documenting evidence while being dismissed as paranoid. About her grandfather, who discovered a fortune only to spend his life protecting it from those who would kill for it. About her parents, forced to flee their home and family. Sometimes courage is just deciding that enough is enough, she replied. The Lockwoods have taken too much from too many people for too long. As Rachel climbed into the sheriff's vehicle, surrounded by deputies, she felt a sense of purpose stronger than any fear. The inheritance she had reluctantly accepted days ago had become a mission of justice, not just for her family, but for an entire community that had lived too long under the shadow of wealth and corruption. Let's go, she told the deputy behind. The wheel. It's time to open the vault for everyone to see. Behind them, in the sheriff's office, phones were already ringing as news of the Lockwood investigation began to spread. The wall of silence that had protected the family for generations was finally beginning to crumble. The convoy of sheriff's vehicles approached Morgan's service station cautiously, amber lights flashing but sirens silent. Through the windshield, Rachel could see that the property had changed since morning black SUVs were parked haphazardly. Around the perimeter, and men in dark clothing stood watch at strategic points. The Lockwoods had established a defensive position. This could get complicated, the deputy driving commented, slowing as they neared the entrance to the property. Those aren't local security guards. They look like private military contractors. Sheriff Jennings' voice crackled over the radio. Remember, we're responding to a property owner's request for assistance. No provocative actions unless threatened. Ms. Morgan's safety is priority one. As they pulled into the gravel lot, the armed men moved to intercept them, hands hovering near concealed weapons. Rachel felt her heart racing but kept her expression composed as the sheriff's vehicle came to a stop. Sheriff Jennings emerged first, her authority evident in her stance and the deliberate way she adjusted her badge to catch the afternoon sunlight. This is official county business, she announced clearly. We're here at the request of Rachel Morgan, the legal owner of this property, to secure historical artifacts of significant value. Harrison Lockwood stepped forward from between two of the guards, his usual polished appearance now showing signs of strain tie loosened, hair slightly disheveled, the confident smile replaced by a tight-lipped grimace. Sheriff Jennings, he acknowledged with forced cordiality. You're outside your jurisdiction. This is a Riverdale County matter. Actually, the sheriff countered, I have authorization from the state attorney general's office pending their arrival. She held up an official document. And as I said, I'm here at the request of the property owner. Lockwood's gaze shifted to Rachel as she stepped out of the vehicle, flanked by deputies. Something like grudging respect flickered across his face before hardening again. Ms. Morgan seems determined to destroy a family legacy over some misguided crusade, he said coldly. These artifacts have been protected by the Lockwood family for generations. Protected? Rachel couldn't hold back her indignation. You mean stolen and hidden. According to General Lockwood's own journals, these artifacts were intended for public benefit to support veterans and reconstruction efforts. Your family has been hoarding national treasures while claiming they were lost. A crowd had begun to gather beyond the property line, curious locals, drawn by the unusual police presence and the growing tension. Among them, Rachel spotted David with his camera, documenting everything, and several unfamiliar faces she suspected were the journalists he'd contacted. Lockwood noticed them too, his expression darkening further. This is private property. I demand these people disperse immediately. The sidewalk is public space, Sheriff Jennings pointed out. Now, Mr. Lockwood, I'll ask you and your employees to step aside. We have legal authority to enter the premises and secure the artifacts pending a full investigation. For a tense moment, it seemed Lockwood might refuse. The armed men looked to him for direction, hands still hovering near weapons. Then from the road came the unmistakable sound of more vehicles approaching black sedans with government plates, followed by vans from 3 different news stations. Lockwood's shoulders sagged almost imperceptibly as he calculated his diminishing options. The state authorities had arrived, and with them, the media attention he'd spent decades avoiding. His security forces might intimidate local officials, but confronting state investigators under the watchful eye of news cameras would cross a line even the Lockwoods couldn't survive. "This isn't over," he told Rachel quietly. Then, louder too. "His men, stand down, let them pass." Sheriff Jennings didn't waste the opportunity. She quickly organized her deputies to secure the perimeter while escorting Rachel to the garage entrance. State investigators approached, introducing themselves and conferring briefly with the sheriff before joining the procession. "We need to document everything exactly as it is," Rachel explained as they entered the garage. "The main chamber is below, access through that floor plate, with the historical vault concealed behind a false wall inside." As they descended into the underground chamber, flashlights illuminated the space that had been transformed from a secret archive into a crime scene. Papers were strewn across the floor, filing cabinets stood open, and equipment had been hastily disconnected, signs of the Lockwoods' attempt to sanitize the area before authorities arrived. "They've tried to remove evidence," one of the state investigators noted, photographing the disruption. "But they didn't have enough time to be thorough." Rachel moved directly to the northeast corner, relief washing over her when she found the false wall still intact. "The vault's still sealed," she announced, locating the hidden trigger mechanism. As before, the wall swung outward to reveal the antechamber beyond. The investigators fell silent as they entered the vault, the magnitude of the discovery evident in their expressions. Display cases lined the walls, each containing carefully preserved artifacts that represented not just tremendous monetary value but irreplaceable historical significance. "These items need to be cataloged and secured immediately," Rachel said, slipping into her professional role as curator. "Many of these documents are fragile and require climate-controlled conditions." For the next 2 hours, Rachel worked alongside the investigators, documenting each artifact, explaining its historical context and significance. The investigators, initially skeptical, became increasingly impressed by the scope and importance of the collection. "This isn't just theft," the lead investigator concluded. "It's a deliberate attempt to suppress historical artifacts of national importance. The State Historical Society needs to be involved immediately." "They already are," Rachel confirmed. "I've been in contact with their directors. They're preparing an emergency preservation order." Outside, the situation had evolved dramatically. News vans had multiplied, reporters broadcasting live from the scene. Local residents, drawn by the commotion, gathered in growing numbers, many sharing their own stories of Lockwood intimidation over the years. David moved among them, collecting testimonials that would further strengthen their case. "3 generations of my family tried to expose the truth, and 3 generations of Lockwoods tried to silence them." The investigator nodded grimly. "Based on what we've found so far, we're expanding our investigation to include fraud, obstruction of justice, and," he lowered his voice, "potential homicide charges related to your uncle's death. The Attorney General has authorized a full inquiry into the Lockwood family's activities over the past 70 years. As the day progressed into evening, floodlights were set up around the property, illuminating the scene with harsh clarity. Rachel watched as teams of specialists carefully removed artifacts from the vault, each item meticulously documented before being placed in secure transport containers. Harrison Lockwood, seeing the physical evidence of his family's crimes being carried away, finally approached Rachel. His security detail had dwindled, most melting away as the legal consequences became apparent. The powerful businessman now looked smaller, older, the confidence that had defined him stripped away by exposure. "You have no idea what you've done," he said, his voice lacking its usual authority. "My grandfather protected those artifacts when no one else would. The country was in chaos after the war. Looters would have scattered everything to the winds." "Your grandfather stole them," Rachel corrected firmly. "And your family has been using that stolen legacy to manipulate and control this community ever since. General Lockwood wanted these artifacts preserved for the public good, not hidden away as your private treasure." Lockwood's expression hardened. "You think this ends with me? The connections my family has built over generations don't disappear overnight. There will be consequences for everyone involved in this spectacle." Before Rachel could respond, a commotion near the road drew their attention. James Lockwood was being led to a state police vehicle in handcuffs, his face a mask of disbelief. "What's happening?" Harrison demanded, his composure finally cracking. Sheriff Jennings approached, her expression somber but resolute. "Your son attempted to access and destroy digital records at the county assessor's office, records related to the original property transfers for this land. One of my deputies caught him in the act." As the implications sank in, Harrison's face went ashen. The Lockwood's carefully constructed web of power was unraveling faster than he could control. "Harrison Lockwood," the lead state investigator announced, joining them with 2 officers. "We have a warrant for your arrest on charges of conspiracy to obstruct justice, tampering with evidence, and accessory to fraud. You have the right to remain silent." Rachel stepped back as the officers led Lockwood away, watching as decades of unchecked power collapsed in a single day. She felt not triumph but a profound sense of restoration, as if a long-broken balance was finally being set right. David approached, camera still in hand. "It's over," he said quietly. "The state prosecutor just announced they're freezing all Lockwood family assets, pending investigation." "Not over," Rachel corrected. "Just beginning. There's 70 years of corruption to unravel, dozens of affected families who deserve restitution." As the night deepened, the activity at Morgan's service station continued unabated. State officials had established a temporary command center, coordinating what had quickly become one of the largest historical recovery operations in the state's history. Margaret found Rachel sitting on the porch steps of the small station office, watching the proceedings with a mixture of exhaustion and wonder. "Your uncle would be proud," the older woman said, lowering herself to sit beside Rachel. "He never lost faith that someday the truth would come out." Rachel nodded, emotion tightening her throat. "I keep thinking about him working alone all those years, meticulously documenting everything while being dismissed as paranoid. About my grandfather building this place not just as a business, but as a vault to protect historical treasures. About my parents having to flee to protect me." "They all played their part," Margaret said gently. "Your grandfather preserved the artifacts, your uncle documented the evidence. Your parents protected you so you could be here now to bring it all to light. Sometimes justice takes generations." A state historical preservation officer approached them, clipboard in hand. "Ms. Morgan, we've completed the preliminary inventory. The collection includes over 300 individual artifacts of significant historical importance, conservatively valued at several $1 million. But their historical and cultural value is incalculable. What happens to them now?" Rachel asked. "With your permission as the property owner, we'd like to transfer everything to the State Historical Society for proper conservation while ownership issues are resolved." Given General Lockwood's clear intentions in his journals, much of the collection will likely end up in the Smithsonian or other public institutions, as he originally intended. Rachel agreed readily, signing the necessary forms. As the officer left, she turned back to Margaret. "What about the gas station itself?" Margaret gestured to the dilapidated building. "Legally, it's still yours. though I imagine its value has just increased considerably as the site of a major historical discovery. The thought sparked something in Rachel, a possibility that felt right in a way she couldn't immediately articulate. What if it became something new? Not just a forgotten gas station or the site of a hidden treasure, but a place that honors what happened here. Over the next 3 months, Rachel's vision took shape with remarkable speed. The state's case against the Lockwoods proceeded with unprecedented momentum, fueled by evidence that had been meticulously preserved for decades and the flood of testimonials from community members finally free to speak about generations of intimidation and corruption. Harrison and James Lockwood faced multiple charges, their assets frozen, their influence evaporating as former allies rushed to distance themselves. The family empire that had seemed unassailable for generations crumbled in weeks. Rachel, with support from the State Historical Society and several preservation grants, transformed Morgan's service station into something new, a small museum dedicated to both the Civil War artifacts recovered from the vault and the remarkable story of their concealment and discovery. The main building was carefully restored, its mid-century character preserved while the interior was converted into exhibition space. The underground chamber, rather than being sealed, became the centerpiece of the museum, a visible reminder of both historical preservation and the lengths to which ordinary people would go to protect truth. On opening day, Rachel stood beside her parents and daughter at the entrance, watching as visitors streamed in, local residents, history enthusiasts, journalists, and even descendants of Civil War veterans who had served under General Lockwood. "I never thought I'd come back here," Rachel's father admitted, emotion thick in his voice. "After we left, I convinced myself this place was lost to us forever." "It was never about the place," Rachel said, squeezing his hand. "It was about the truth it contained." Uncle Will understood that. Grandpa, too. Inside, visitors moved through carefully designed exhibits that told two intertwined stories, that of General Lockwood's lost legacy and its intended purpose to help rebuild a broken nation after war, and the more recent story of the Morgan family's 3-generation quest to bring that truth to light. The centerpiece of the collection, displayed prominently in the main hall, was General Lockwood's personal journal, open to the page where he had written his final wishes. "Let these humble possessions serve the nation for which so many gave their last full measure of devotion. In victory, we must remember the cost, and in peace, we must honor the sacrifice." Beside it stood a photograph of William Morgan, Rachel's uncle, at the gas station in its heyday, his expression determined and proud. The plaque beneath it reads simply, "Some treasures are measured not in gold, but in truth preserved against all odds." As Rachel guided her daughter through the exhibits, explaining the family history that had been hidden from her until now, she felt a sense of completion that went beyond professional satisfaction. What had begun as a reluctant obligation, clearing out an unwanted inheritance, had become a mission of justice and historical restoration. "Mom, is this why you work in a museum?" Lily asked, looking around with wide eyes. "To protect important things?" Rachel smiled, realizing the truth in her daughter's simple question. "Yes, sweetheart. We preserve the past so its lessons aren't forgotten. Sometimes those lessons are beautiful, sometimes difficult, but always valuable." Later that evening, after the crowds had departed, Rachel stood alone in the underground chamber that had changed everything. The space had been carefully preserved, but transformed, now properly lit, ventilated, and accessible, its secrets open for all to see rather than hidden away. From this hidden room, 3 generations of her family had fought a quiet battle against wealth and power that had seemed insurmountable. Her grandfather had discovered a treasure and recognized its true significance beyond monetary value. Her uncle had spent decades documenting evidence while being dismissed as paranoid. Her parents had fled to protect her when threats became too dangerous. And now, against all odds, Justice had finally come not through a single dramatic confrontation, but through the accumulated efforts of ordinary people who refused to surrender truth to power, no matter how long it took. As Rachel climbed the steps back to the main building, she thought about the brass key that had started everything, now displayed in its own small case with the story of its discovery. Such a small thing to unlock such momentous change. Outside, the evening light cast long shadows across the renovated station. Where once stood a forgotten business at an abandoned crossroads, now stood a place of remembrance and education, a testament to persistence in the face of seemingly impossible odds. Margaret joined her on the porch, both women watching as the last rays of sunlight glinted off the newly restored vintage sign. Morgan Legacy Museum, where history comes to light. "I never expected this outcome when I called you about your uncle's property," Margaret admitted. "At best, I hoped we might finally expose the truth about the Lockwoods." "I never imagined all this," Rachel nodded. "Neither did my grandfather, when he built this place to protect historical treasures. Or my uncle when he spent decades gathering evidence everyone dismissed. They couldn't see the end result of their efforts, but they persisted anyway, trusting that someday it would matter. That's how most important things happen," Margaret observed. "Not in single dramatic moments, but through years of small, faithful actions that accumulate until the dam finally breaks." As darkness settled over the museum, Rachel locked the doors one final time before heading home. The inheritance she had reluctantly accepted months ago had transformed from burden to mission to legacy. What began as one family's quest for justice had expanded into a community's healing and a nation's historical recovery. The gas station that had been built to conceal was now dedicated to revealing not just artifacts of historical significance, but the enduring power of ordinary people to stand against corruption and the importance of preserving truth for future generations. As Rachel drove away, she glanced in her rearview mirror at the illuminated museum standing proudly at the crossroads. Some inheritances couldn't be measured in property or possessions. They were counted instead in courage passed down, in truth preserved, and in justice finally served, however long it might take. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.